In recent decades, as South Korea continues to embrace globalization, the immigrant community has been steadily growing. But how inclusive has Korea become? Poor working conditions and unfair treatment of low-income migrant workers continue to be a concern, and the calls to fix such issues have been increasing. That's where the International Organization for Migration could step in. For this week's Touch Base in Seoul, we have with us now the new Chief of Mission for the IOM's Korea branch, Mr. Steve Hamilton, who has joined the organization late last year. Mr. Hamilton, it's great to have you on the show today.
No, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, for those who don't know, could you first tell us about the International Organization for Migration, what it does and what are its goals?
IOM's, it's one of the organizations that people don't know very much about, but yet it's a very old organization. It was founded in 1951, so we're quite old, but we were set up outside the United Nations, still as an intergovernmental organization. It was set up to focus on the size of the refugee problem in Europe post-World War II, and it just grew from there to look about migration as a whole. Which was quite ironic in Europe when we talk about the problems of migration to the Europeans and remind them that we were actually set up for the problem in Europe at the time. IOM focuses primarily on helping governments address migration issues. We have 173 member states now, 15,000 staff working in 150 countries. We really focus on getting a better understanding for migration, enhancing information for the public as well as policymakers and within the United Nations as a whole.
You said it's been around for a long time, since the 50s, but the meaning, the scope of the migrants in the 21st century surely must be quite different from what it was from back then, from when the IOM was first founded. What are the IOM's main focuses as of 2021 now?
Yeah, you're definitely right. Even when I started in IOM 20 years ago, we were much smaller. I was staff number 2,000 something, and now we have, now they're in the 40s and 50,000s of staff numbers. Really the issue of migration has grown globally, and it's really get on the radar of governments. So, IOM is broken up into many different departments because migration cross-cuts into many different areas. So we have a Department of Operations and Emergencies that focuses on humanitarian response, whether it be man-made disasters to like post-conflict work, or whether it be environmental disasters. So IOM is very much a proximity-based organization. As I mentioned, we have offices in 150 countries, but we have 400 plus offices in those countries. So we're usually already in the countryside, in the remote areas of those countries. So when something happens, we're usually ready to respond with existing relationships with the government. We also move the majority of refugees around the world. Now, there is an agency that does refugee status determination, UNHCR. But when that refugee is going to go to a country, traditionally it's IOM that moves that refugee. So we do that work everywhere around the world doing that. And that's not only movement, it's also doing medical exams for them. It's making sure they have cultural orientation if needed. So it's a fairly comprehensive system. We also have a migration management department that looks after immigration and border management, because IOM is the UN migration agency. So within that, we can't forget immigration departments around the world. So we do quite a bit of work on border and identity solutions, on immigration and visa issuance. IOM has a large program, even with Korea, on the issuance of immigrant visas out of Mongolia and Europe, which a lot of people aren't aware of yet because it's a new program. So we're spread quite across many areas. We have a large focus on labor migration, which is, of course, of interest here because, there's such a large number of labor migrants here. And it's not only issuing good labor migration programs, but also assuring that labor migrants are well cared for, and there's a bit of monitoring, but there's also a bit of opportunity in there as well.
So it's a very hands-on organization then, really getting involved with the situation, not just on a intergovernmental level, but really hands-on in the local level as well then.
Exactly. IOM's focus was really on direct assistance, and it was around direct assistance to the local official as well. Too often agencies are staying in capital cities, not getting out and figuring out, okay, how is the local official actually going to deal with this? Who's going to be the official working at night when this problem occurs? What kind of support will he have? And that was really the way IOM grew up, being the agency that would be there in that remote area working with officials on complex problems.
Okay, so now you've become the chief of mission of here in Korea. How long has the Korean branch been open for, do we know?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's been at least 20 plus years that it's been here. But it's grown significantly in the last few years.
What areas does the Korean branch really focus on?
I mean, obviously, a large of what we do is focused on the global relationship with the government of the Republic of Korea. But we do have programs on disaster risk reduction, working with various NGOs on raising their capacity to be able to handle environmental disasters. We resettle refugees, like I said previously. Refugees coming to Korea, it's IOM that brings them here. So we have that program. We try and work closely with KOICA, MFA, MOJ on their needs. I mean, IOM makes itself available to the government to help solve their problems. We work with the Migration Research and Training Center, trying to really push a stronger evidence base. And what we find in Korea, there's quite a bit of research, but it's about getting that research out to the world because migration is a global problem. And some of the real quality research that's done here, it's important that everyone can read it as well.
I understand your previous post was in Norway. How is being here in Korea, the situation here in Korea on migration different like that from Norway?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm here quite early, so
sure, you
to
arrived
make
here
the big differences
late last year.
Yes, but I mean, there's already some noticeable differences. If I look at labor migration, when I was working in Norway, I mean, the Norwegians view that as a private sector responsibility. They put in some standards for visa issuance, and the private sector has to sort it out. But here, it's a government-led program. And it's very carefully monitored. I mean, and for me, a well-managed government program instills much more confidence in the public when they know that things are being constantly assessed. So that would be the main difference I see so far, the willingness of the government to really step in and carefully manage their program.
I also want to talk about how the COVID-19 situation here has impacted the rights and livelihoods of migrants, not just in Korea, but around the world as well. It's a really difficult period for the world, isn't it, right now?
I mean, it's horrible. I mean, COVID has impacted everybody. But with migrants, you get some of the most vulnerable to begin with. They already had very unstable livelihoods. And then with COVID came the stigmatization. I mean, all of a sudden, everyone's being stigmatized. There was that fear of the other. Everyone pointing fingers at other people that had it. And migrants are the quintessential other. So they found themselves on the out as, well, you're from somewhere else, and COVID comes from somewhere else. So it was really difficult. And they were finding they were losing their jobs, but they couldn't go home. And they were so used to sending remittances home to take care of their families back home, who are now also losing their jobs, that it was a worst case scenario for migrants, where they were stuck. They were unsure about medical coverage. I mean, the government's really stepped up and made that clear. But there was a period of people didn't know. What if I get sick? Will I get a vaccine later? It was just so much unknown because it was a crisis the world hasn't had for 100 years. But no one ever envisages that you wouldn't be able to fly home. Even now that it's still so hard to go back to your country of nationality. So it's a very challenging time to be a migrant. But on the other side, there's jobs available. And it's hard if people are in the employment permit system where they're linked to one employer, but yet they can't shift to maybe a better employment situation where there's a company in dire need of somebody. So they're really stuck in a difficult place.
Right, there were many reports last year of the difficult situation that migrants faced here in Korea, whether they should admit that they're there for authorities to try and get tested, to try and find out what rights that they have, because they were feared that they would be deported back. But then at the same time, for health authorities, they needed to find out if there was perhaps a cluster in the migrant community as well. So it was a difficult situation that they needed to really link up with. But is your organization something that will try to help things like that in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll try and work closely, not only with the government here, but also the embassies that are here. I think COVID exposed a lot of vulnerabilities, and I think everyone wants to try and address those later. I mean, a big problem we have here is the 400,000 irregular migrants that are working undocumented. Now, that's a sizable number. So even if the government wanted to do some sort of monitoring, we don't know where they are. So that's where you need some sort of expansion in the employment permit system, even just to be able to better monitor.
Your term as the Chief of Mission here in Korea for the IOM is 5 years, and you're just getting started. What are your plans now, looking ahead?
First of all, I'm going to learn Korean. I start next week.
Okay.
But from there, I mean, clearly the focus will be on labor migration because it's such an issue here. I mean, previously I worked on fisheries-related programs, so I was already aware of exploitation of fishermen by South Korean companies. So I think we'll try and lobby a bit more for engagement of some of the large South Korean companies to put a bit more integrity in their supply chains. But also, I mean, we need to put quite a bit of effort in highlighting the benefit of migration. I mean, too often people are talking about how lucky migrants are to be here, but the reality is that countries are lucky migrants come. I mean, migrants do the most basic jobs for Korea. I mean, rice on your table comes from migrants. You know, the basic necessities for Koreans are being provided by migrant labor. And I think people need to recognize that they're of a great benefit to the country, and they contribute to a very well-functioning society.
Well, it's certainly been interesting to get to know about the IOM and yourself on Touch Base today, and we'd love to have you back on the show at some point as well to talk more about first how you're getting along with your time in Korea, but also more about these pressing issues facing migrants here in Korea. We hope to speak to you again. We've been meeting with Steve Hamilton, Chief of Mission for the International Organization of Migration's Korea branch. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.